Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our very first webinar, which is about the cloud FinOps. First, I will start with a couple of words about the Revolgy and some numbers about the Revolgy. We are more than 25 years in the technology business, and we are serving more than 2,000 customers in more than 40 countries. We have a lot of technical experts, and we are proud partner of AWS. And I have a great pleasure and great honor to invite a guest for today's webinar, Sebastian from AWS. Sebastian, would you tell us a couple of words about yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. My name is Sebastian Gemski. I'm a principal solution architect. I work for AWS, mainly with startups in so-called growth markets in EMEA region. I have over 20 years of professional experience in building all kinds of software solutions on 3 continents for all kinds of industries. And I will be happy to join Jan here to tell you a little bit more about FinOps and what we call cloud financial management. Back to you, Jan.
Thank you, Sebastian. And a couple of words about myself. My name is Jan Sechovec. I'm principal architect and developer here in Revolgy, taking care of our customers' infrastructures and just playing around the technologies for more than 25 years in the business. I've started in the army, so I was in the military for like 15 years, building the data networks for the Air Force. Then I was working in the bank, and I was participating on the digital transformation from the perspective of APIs. And now I'm 2 years in a Revolgy, and I'm enjoying my cloud life. So this is about myself, and let's start our FinOps journey. And what will be the best or better than start our FinOps journey by looking at some very interesting numbers. In the 2021, there was more than 360 billions of total spend in the public cloud, which is pretty interesting amount of number. On the infrastructure as a services, there was a part of like the 80 billions spent in the cloud. And what is the most interesting on those numbers is that 25 billions was just the clear waste. It means that the technologies were like running in the cloud with nothing to do and just spending the money. And this amount is huge. If we take a look on those 25 billions of US dollars and the overall waste, there was like the 14 billions on idling resources. It means that running instances without, the actual use, orphaned maybe images, or the storages, and just instances which are just doing the warm air in the data center actually. 8 billions were on over provisioned resources. It means that, for example, if you have an instance which is not right sized and it's, bigger than you actually need, there was a pretty big amount of the waste in the cloud on those. And the 3 billions is counted on the orphaned volumes and the snapshots. It means like the storages which were orphaned and not used anymore. How is this even possible? Those huge amount of waste. So I have a couple of stories for you right now. The first one, you probably see sometimes like the peaking services. In this particular case, I often see like the peaking lambdas, just the AWS Lambda, which are making those, for example, $4,000 peaks in 1 hour. It might be because of the not properly set alerts or the wrong code of the Lambda itself. The next very, let's say, common example of the waste in the cloud might be for example, the development environments which are running over the weekends. If you just sum the integrals of the weekends, it's pretty huge, let's say, amount of money just spent unnecessarily in the cloud. Kubernetes clusters and the managed Kubernetes. Normally, if you don't care how are you running your Kubernetes clusters, you normally see let's say, you can see just the inefficiency. In this particular example, you can see that you pay like more than 11,000 US dollars per month on the Kubernetes cluster, but effectively or actually used was just the work, just the compute time. It's something like the around the 50% of inefficiency. What I also see very often are the idling resources. In this particular case, if you start, for example, the GPU instance in the cloud and you don't care about stopping them and you keep it just running, it costs you just a significant amount of money. But how to have it under the control? Just the simple and very simple answer in 2 days is maybe this something. We can call it like a buzzword, but the word is just the FinOps, financial operations. Because besides of taking care of the technology from the DevOps perspective and the security in the cloud, you have the third very important pillar, which is just called FinOps, and taking care of the financial control in the cloud. There are some, let's say, main principles of the FinOps. I don't want to go really deeply into it because Sebastian have the whole section about it in his talk. So, but what I see that the main principle here is that the teams need to collaborate. You need to, let's say, talk together. Not only, let's say, developers are taking care of the overall cloud spend, but also the financial guys, procurement, and just everyone in the company. If we are talking about, just the principles of the FinOps, there are also some phases of the FinOps. And I would like to just emphasize that the FinOps is not one-shot action. You don't need to, let's say, just only optimize something for one time. It's more or less like iterative process where you start with the understanding of your cloud costs, then you can plan the optimization, and then you have to work on the culture to, let's say, introduce the iterative processes around the cloud cost management in your company. And now I'd like to switch to the Sebastian, who will take a part of the cloud financial management on AWS. Sebastian,
Brilliant. Thank you very much. As you probably already know, there is no service named AWS FinOps. And in general, if you search through the documents created by AWS, the term FinOps, it does appear, but it's not that frequent. Is it because AWS ignores FinOps? No, it's not like that. We actually have our own term. We call it Cloud Financial Management, but the general principles behind it are the very same. So I will be using the term CFM or Cloud Financial Management very frequently in my part of the presentation, and it's pretty much FinOps. Just named like this by AWS. All right, great. So the general purpose behind the CFM is not just to make you pay a little bit less or less in general right now. It's about making sure that when you succeed, so when your organization grows, when your product grows, when you actually get what you are aiming for, the unit cost goes down. So the cost per the unit, which is important for you. So the cost per transaction, customer acquired, session, sale, whatever is important for your business, that it goes down. So it would mean that your actual profitability gets better because your income scales in a better way than your costs. So this is the purpose. So we are aiming to give you a framework, tools, and services that should help you to do that. But it cannot fit just one service because this is a little bit more complex. Why is it more complex? CFM, as it is, it has 4 pillars. And each of the services I will be speaking about in a moment, it belongs to one pillar pretty much, because it conceptually serves a particular purpose which is coherent with that pillar. So those pillars are see, save, plan, and run. What are the differences between those pillars, or what is specific about them? So C is basically about the measurement. So it's about knowing what you are paying for at the correct granularity, because it's not enough to know that my data transfer is X dollars. You actually should understand what you are paying for exactly, because maybe there is one cost factor which is bumping up your data transfer costs. So you should know which cost factor to actually make an adjustment, right? Save, I think that this pillar is quite obvious, right? It's about using correct mechanisms. And depending on a particular service, AWS provides different mechanisms that you can use to save money. For instance, for S3, it can be tiering. For EC2, it can be reserved instances, and so on, so on. Plan is about knowing what to expect. It's about being able to estimate what will happen in the future if, for instance, your business grows according to the plan, and to prepare yourself for the future. Because, for instance, it may be absolutely feasible that in future you would like to use a completely different mechanism than you are using right now, just because of your scale. And probably the most important pillar, I guess, at least for me intuitively, is run. So it's about governance. So it's about knowing what is happening, because, not always everything goes according to the plan, right? So you should be able to react if something does not go according to the plan. So with those 4 pillars, I will let's try to iterate very quickly what kind of activities and expected outcomes are there within each of them. So when it comes to seeing, so measurement and accountability, I already mentioned this level of granularity. So how do you achieve it? Of course, you have several conceptual levels, several conceptual constructs that you can use to compose your resources, your cloud resources. So you should be able to implement the correct account structure, which really reflects how your business is constructed. And you should use also auxiliary mechanisms like tagging that Jan will cover in a little bit more detail later, to actually mark particular resource and the purpose it serves, so that you can then make a correlation between the cost and the benefit. That's very important. If you already have this data at the correct granularity, having the data is not enough. You should also make sure it's visible. You should publish it. You should send it to the correct people to make sure that they are able to do something actionable with that. And as I mentioned, having just the cost, it's not enough. You need to correlate it, for instance, with your value streams or even revenue streams to actually understand how will it behave if you, for instance, are 10 times bigger. So how will it grow? And to actually make this correspondence, so to refer to the value stream or revenue stream, you need to have a correct valid KPIs. So business-driven KPIs. So then it really makes sense because you know that, for instance, this particular cost has a good justification because of raising this particular KPI. When it comes to the second pillar, so saving, of course, you need to think proactively about saving. So you need to be aware of the mechanisms that you can use, for instance, like the saving plans or reserved instances I've already mentioned. Once you are designing the service, once you are designing your platform, and because otherwise you will already be inefficient since the very beginning. But then you can optimize by identifying the waste. This is something Jan has already mentioned, because of course you can over provision. Of course you can, for instance, pick incorrect instance type, which would not be perfect for this particular purpose. There are some things you don't know at the very beginning, but you will know after some time. Even if you have picked the correct service, even if you have picked the correct resource, it doesn't mean that you have picked the best purchase option. So for instance, after some time, when you already have some predictability when it comes to service consumption, you can pick you can use a better purchase option, for instance, reserved some instance. And of course, you should also be aware of the new mechanisms that do pop up all the time, because something that was the best option for you last year may not be the best option right now, because there may be some new way to actually save you even more money. When it comes to planning, of course, typically from all other kind of industries, we think about planning as budgets, and it's good to have also budgets in the cloud. And the budgets doesn't just mean planning for a long period of time, like for a year, but also means forecasting. So knowing whether we are actually meet these budget assumptions or not really. And you should be able to do this on the ongoing basis. And we fortunately have some services for that as well. And estimation for future based on the actual utilization, current utilization is very important. You cannot just do the rough approximation based on whatever. And this planning, this approximation or estimation is not only about estimating the costs, because if those costs are correlated to the business value or to the business KPIs, then you should know the unit cost, for instance, of adding another merchant to your platform, or adding another B2B customer, or expanding to another country. That's the knowledge that you should gain by being able to correlate those costs with the business KPIs. And of course, because your business is probably not only just software running on the cloud, business is much more than that. So integrating all of that, integrating the cloud finance management with the general finance management in your organization, it's very important, because in general, there's one balance sheet for the whole organization, right? So it's important to be profitable, not only just when it comes to buying cloud resources, but in general as a company. And the final pillar, so running things, it's about not just being able to detect issues once they happen, but it's also about sharing this responsibility. So making sure that everyone within the organization have the understanding of how important the CFM is and what is their role, what is their accountability. Because otherwise, sometimes people get stuck in the past way of thinking about IT expenditures, and this doesn't work in the cloud anymore. But of course, when it comes to the governance, you need to implement some guardrails. And we also have some services for that. We'll be speaking about this a little bit later, just to make sure that you are not caught off guard when something bad happens. And in general, things change, your architecture changes, it evolves. So those mechanisms, those automations, they cannot be static. They need to adjust to what's happening, especially if you give a large autonomy to your teams. If they have, for instance, the freedom to use tools, pick tools of their choice, and so on. All right, so these are the pillars. And of course, those pillars are implemented by plenty of tools. And this slide just lists all kinds of mechanisms and tools and services that somehow fit those pillars. And of course, I'm not going to cover all of them in detail. It would not make sense, but I will cover very briefly in a theoretical way the most important ones. And then Jan will get back with some practical scenarios and practical implementation, and he will basically show you how it works. So for the planning stage, of course, we should start with AWS budgets. This is the tool hopefully everyone or almost everyone is aware of. So when it comes to budgets, you can design your own custom budgets. They can be one-time budgets, recurring budgets. It's pretty much up to you how you set it up. The budgets can be also expressed in the dollars or in the measurement units for the particular service. The budgets also are able to track you the utilization of the long-term commitments, like resource, like saving plans or reservations. The budgets work not only with the current expenditure, but also with the forecasts. And the very good thing about this tool is that this is not only very flexible, but it's also very nicely integrated with the rest of the AWS ecosystem, which means that you can use the information which is in the AWS budgets for all kind of automation. So you can pretty much create your own workflows, add notifications based on AWS budgets. And it's also very customizable, and it requires very little code. So it's one of the very few tools that you should really get familiar since the very beginning of your AWS journey, just to make sure that you're not getting surprised. And I really appreciate this tool's granularity level, that you can create those budgets on the level of abstraction that you feel most comfortable with, or that you are simply accountable for. When it comes to running things, the tool that you should really be aware of is the cost anomaly detection, because the anomalies can happen. Typically, every business has its rhythm, its own tact. So, for instance, the consumption is really based on the patterns of the usage. And of course, every system has different patterns because the users are sometimes very different. That can be business users, they can be they're just individuals walking down the street, children, adults, professionals, and so on. And so typically there are some sorts of regularities. But anomalies can happen, and they can have very different sources. Some malicious action, or error in the code, error in the setup, in the configuration, or plenty of things can happen. And this tool, Cost Anomaly Detection, can help you detect them pretty much on the go based on the past consumption. So we just enable the monitoring, which is very simple, and then you get this actionable information you can do something with. And of course, the tool is smart enough to understand what is bumping up the cost. So it's able to get down when it comes to the granularity to spot which factor, the cost factor, has actually skyrocketed, for instance. And of course, you can also use this tool for all kinds of automation. So if you want to set up an automated workflow based on the anomaly detected, it is also possible. When it comes to understanding or learning the cost, being able to introspect into the actual costs, there are a few tools that you should at least know about. The first one you are probably already familiar with, and it's Cost Explorer. It's very underappreciated because typically people do not customize it that much, but it's very powerful. You can slice your costs using all kind of imaginable criteria, by accounts, by services, of course, by time, by types of instances, pretty much whatever you can imagine. Of course, it's able to do some basic forecasting, to do some trend analysis as well. You can also use the API level integration, so you can get the information out of the Cost Explorer. It's the best thing about this tool is that it's very easy to adopt. So you can pretty much jump on it and start using it straight away. It's very intuitive, and it's your best friend. It's your first best friend when it comes to the CFM when you're starting your journey in the cloud. And it doesn't mean that you won't use it later. You will keep using it, but as a starting point, because it's very powerful, and it's basically your entry point into the CFM world. But at some point, it may actually appear that you need the information, the cost information, on a higher resolution level, I would say. And then you should get familiar with Cost and Usage Report, CUR. What is the difference between CUR and Cost Explorer? So the difference is that for CUR, you are able to actually export the raw data. And this raw data can be, for instance, on the resource level. So my favorite example here, and I'm sorry, I keep referring to it all the time, is the data transfer. So if you really want to understand how does the data transfer occur in your platform, which can be a very complex distributed system, then the best way, at least this is how I do it, is actually to extract CUR and then to perform some queries, because this is structured data, and you can load this data straight into Amazon Redshift or simply query it using SQL. And of course, the format of the data is well known. So and there are plenty of samples and queries shared by professionals on the net. So you can actually use some pre-made queries to understand a little bit better what is happening when it comes to, for instance, data transfer. So where is data coming from? Where is data coming to? And what was the rate for this particular transfer? And so on, so on. So this is very powerful. And as this is highly standardized as well, the information is not on the go. So the resolution is, I think it's hourly or something like this. But still, it's very good for all kinds of automations. If you, for instance, want to track some improvement, or if you want to set some guardrails when it comes to the cost control, especially for some categories which are very important to you. Another tool which is very interesting, actually, this is probably not really applicable for everyone here. Typically, rather for big enterprises or for the ISVs, for some software vendors or some software houses who actually control the AWS accounts of their customers or work for their customers, and all the, for instance, billing goes through this particular software house. So we have a tool for this where they can pretty much manage how they how the billing happen on both layers. So the billing between AWS and this intermediary and their customers. So this really simplifies the cloud financial management for such kind of companies. So this is not for everyone, but this also helps you to optimize, because, for instance, you can see your margins, you can understand them, you can make some predictions and so on. So it's a very good, useful tool, but for a narrow, I would say, category of AWS customers. There's another tool which is also very interesting, and it also is not applicable for everyone, but I find it's interesting enough to mention it right now. It's called Application Cost Profiler, and the previous one was about the intermediaries, and this one is for about the companies which have their own product, but this product is multi-tenant. So imagine, for instance, that you have quite a complex platform, and you are serving some customers, and those customers are using the same services, and it's really hard to actually make this mapping. So the cost of the particular serving the particular customer and the profitability based only on this particular customer. And at this point, forget about pricing, the pricing that you've created for your customer, but think about the real value provided, because you want to create your pricing for the customer based on the value provided, right? You want your pricing to be fair and in general to make sense. So in some cases, it's a challenge, because if you are, for instance, have your application in a container, and this container serves several customers, so how to split this value gained, or even how to split the cost of the container between those customers. Of course, you can do this equally, but not all the customers are equal. Some of them, for instance, their consumption may be higher or lower, and so on. So this is what Application Cost Profiler helps you with. It helps you to integrate the metering solution in your overall billing, just to make this approximation, or just to make this split of the cost, to just to make sure that you are able to do this analysis on this level of detail. So it's very interesting. It's also very simple, but still it's also very powerful, and it can help you to actually optimize your pricing for your customers that your platform is serving based on the real data. So you can be really data driven thanks to this one. All right. When it comes to the actual optimization, so the final pillar, of course, we have purchase and resource recommendation. And the good thing about this is that it's also based on the real consumption. It's based on the real data. So what it does, it really analyzes your workloads. It really analyzes the utilization of your resources. And it can suggest you that, all right, so maybe the savings plan with such options, with such configuration, will be the good option based on what has happened within the last month or 2 or 3, and so on. You are able to make the better decision, to make this decision very simple, because it really simplifies you this operation of, for instance, buying the savings plan. And it makes you more confident that your investment, because this is some sort of investment, right? You're making a commitment for a longer period of time, at least 1 year. So it makes you more sure. It assures you that this investment, it really makes sense, because this is really based on the actual platform consumption, based on the actual data. It's based on actual usage, which is very important. And the good point is that it's not only about how does particular, for instance, instance type serve this particular scenario, but it's also, so it's not only about whether it's fit for the goal, but it's also about the utilization. So maybe it's over provisioned, maybe actually you need more, and this mechanism will also tell you that. All right, so enough of theory. Let's talk a little bit about practice. So Jan, what have you prepared for us?
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for your presentation. So it was like really nice, let's say, deep dive and insights to the tools you have in or we all have in AWS, just the native one. And I'm also, let's say, all the time amazed how many possibilities you have in AWS to take care of the cost. That's pretty, let's say, wow. That's great. And I'm still asking myself a question. Does anybody even need like any of the third party tools from other vendors to take care of the cloud cost? And I would like answer easily that no, because the first party tools are the best one, I believe. And like with all the sort of things you have, you can achieve literally anything. So back to the presentation. I prepared for you some practical examples, which will just show some of the principles Sebastian talked about in his presentation in practice. And I have chosen the simple one. I would say that every FinOps practitioner or every cloud financial management practitioner should master and practice in his company to take care of the cloud ecosystem from the financial perspective. So the first example will be about the tagging, about the tag policies and cost allocation. Sebastian already mentioned that it's really important to understand the overall structure of your cloud costs, to have, let's say, all dollars, I would say, allocated onto the teams, onto the business units, on the organizational units, or even, let's say, the part of the application projects. And this is where tagging is very great approach to achieve it, because then you can like slice your bills in a cost explorer using the tags, etc. But first you have to, let's say, think about to have some really solid tagging strategy in your company, so because if you just choose the text randomly, it can be messy over the time. So you have to first think about how would you structure your tagging strategy and how you apply the policies on your cloud resources. Normally, the great approach is to, let's say, make a document with your, let's say, which reflects in fact your organization from the perspective of your working style, of your organization layers, organization systems, style of or the your application itself, how does your environment looks like, etc. Normally there are some basic recommendations how should the text should be structured. Normally you have the basic ones like who's the owner of the particular resource, who owns or which business unit owns this particular resource, who's the billing center in the case if you are like to master not only the showbacks but also the chargebacks in your company, what kind of asset it is, what kind of application, or what's the application name, and particularly, for example, for what environment you are creating the particular resource, etc., etc. So master your tagging strategy first, and then start to implement it. I will present you some of the basics. How can you implement the tagging strategy in your AWS account on, let's say, the console examples. It's necessary to be said that a lot of, all of these approaches you can also achieve not by clicking in the console, but doing in the infrastructure as a code. It might be terraformed. You can use the cloud formation to set all the things I'm going to present you. But for just the simplicity, I have chosen the console approach. So if you'd like to start with a tagging strategy, it you should start from the, let's say, organization perspective, because you can have a more, let's say, AWS accounts, but you need to have like the one, let's say, tagging strategy over your organization, and then set the, let's say, tagging strategy to the particular accounts. So normally you go into the organization and you go into the policies here, and you can turn on the tag policies. Then you can just enable it and you can create your first policy here. Let's think that our first policy will be called like the cost allocation, and then we can create a particular case. So I have chosen that the first tag I'm going to set up will be called like the environment, and I will specify the values for this particular tag. So let's imagine that in our infrastructure or in our company, we have like the development environment, production environment, user acceptance test environment, and the staging. Then when I just set up all the, let's say, all the values, I can create the actual policy, and then I need to attach the policy to the particular account. So let's imagine that in my organization there are like 3 accounts right now. One is master, 2 accounts I'm running some, let's say, products there, and I'd like to attach the tagging policy I just created to this particular account. So I can just click attach it. I can review it, and then I need to switch to, let's say, the account to take the action and show you how you just use the tagging in your on your particular resources then. So let's imagine that I'm starting a new instance in the EC2, and what I do in the moment I'm starting or configuring the new instance, I can include not only, let's say, the name of the instance as one of the key, but I can also implement or insert the environment tag, like the environment key. And let's imagine that I just put a wrong, let's say, or unsupported value here. So it's not development. I just put a unknown here, and let's see what we then see. Our instance is running right now, so I can review the tags, and then we have accessible in AWS console the AWS resource group from and the perspective of tag policies, and I can just review if all, let's say, resources I have in my cloud infrastructure are compliant with the tagging policy I just created and attached to the account. And I see that for this particular instance I set up earlier, I have one non-compliant tech status. So I see that normally for the environment tag key, I should have some one of the preset values I did in the policy before, but there is a tag value which is not compliant. So I can just go to the instance and, let's say, fix it to throw away the non-compliant status, and this is it. So this will help you not only to slice or this help you not only, let's say, take care of the implementation of your tagging policy over all of your AWS accounts and resources, but it will also help you then to use it, for example, in Cost Explorer. Because then if you just set the appropriate tags, you can slice your bills or the charts, and all the all the, let's say, reports, I would say, from the perspective of tagging. So you can easily create a report where you see the portion of the cloud costs divided by the environment tagging. So this was the first example. The second practical example will be about setting the budgets, alerts, and actions. As Sebastian mentioned before, there is a whole ecosystem of having the cloud costs under the control and using the proactive mechanism to actively control, let's say, and automate your infrastructure to take action if there is something, let's say, wrong. For example, if you are exceeding the budget. But first, the budgets should be set up, and then you can just attach the alerts to it and the actions. So you go into the console, you'll find easily the AWS budgets. You can go there and create a new budget. You have several options of creating the budget type. There is like the cost budget, which is the budget per resource, for example, and constrained by the actual cost by day or by month. It depends. You have a usage budget. It means that if you are running, for example, some instance, you can limit the usage by the particular, let's say, usage time, for example, or some other perspective, etc., etc. Let's imagine that I need to set up the cost budget on my account, so I can go just directly into it. You just select the name. My purpose right now is I'm running the GPU instances in the cloud, the G4DN instance types, and I need to, let's say, set a budget on it because those instances are pretty costly, and I need to have it under the control to not, let's say, overspend my budget. So I'll set it. I'll set the budget as a fixed, and the budget will be recurring. So every month, the let's say the budget itself is being reset, and you start with the new one. I have chosen that the monthly budget will be $400, and what I do here, I can scope the budget on the particular AWS cost dimensions. So I have chosen the dimension which is like called the instance type, and select the G4D and 2x large particular instance type. Then the next step is to configure the alerts, because normally if you are like reaching the budget from the perspective thresholds, you need to be alerted somehow to get the email or to do any other action. It really depends. So you have to set it. My first alert is very simple. I just need to be told by the AWS if I'm reaching the 80% of the threshold of the budget. Just send me the mail. So I just configure it here, 80% of the budget, and I set the email recipient here. It's smart to just do some your email plus extension, because you can then filter it in your email account if you are using the emails from this particular example. But you can also, let's say, set the SNS alerts, and then you can like automate the things in other areas of the AWS ecosystem. So I continue with the threshold, and the last step is that I have chosen to set the action, because I need to be sure that if something, let's say, if I'm like approaching my budget limit, I'd like to have the instance stopped automatically by the AWS. This is just my use case right now. So I can just set the action with this particular purpose. And the first thing which is really needed and important to notice is to select the appropriate action type. So the action type is automate instance stop for EC2, but you have to set also the the corresponding IAM role, because the budget system should be must be able to stop the actual instance in your AWS account. So there is like the policy connected to this IAM role. So there is a guide which will just tell you what to do if you are lost. And the last step here is to select the instances what will be stopped when I just approach the budget limit. And then you just review, you create a budget, and it's running. So easy like this. You have set your budget with alerts and particular action. So it means that you will never again have your instances idling in the AWS, for example. And the last example I prepared for you is just the example how to use a AWS Cost Explorer for forecasting. Sebastian mentioned that the Cost Explorer is really, let's say, strong tool, and you can achieve literally anything, like from the perspective of visualization and slicing the data and creating the reports. And one of the really interesting feature is to use the Cost Explorer for forecasting, and it's also very simple. And it will help you to achieve, let's say, more visibility for your, let's say, cloud future as well. Pretty simple, achievable. You go into the cost management in AWS. You just start the Cost Explorer, and in the Cost Explorer you see just your cloud cost on a particular organization or account as you filtered before for the period of time you have selected here. But what you can do is that you can extend the period not only to the past but also to the future. You can select the 3 months extension or 12 months extension for the forecasting. So you select it, and you will get the chart like this, where you see the actual forecast. This is just the dotted line here, but you also see, let's say, the prediction interval. So it means that if you are going to use your current infrastructure on full power, I would say, just utilizing it really fully. So your predicted cost might be in this area, or on the other hand, if you are going to have it just stop everything, and there you will be paying only for example, like the images and snapshots or the storages, you will be somewhere here. But from the previous usage pattern, the Cost Explorer just predicted that in the future our cost will be like this. So this was just some practical scenarios how you can use the native tools in AWS console, and also just 3 things you have to master: tagging, budget, alerts, actions, and use the Cost Explorer with its included services and features. So this is it, and I'd like to ask Sebastian to wrap our webinar and the sections we had.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jan. By the way, guys, before we proceed, actually, are you already using, for instance, tag to marking your resources? Were you already familiar with the tools Jan has presented? So feel free to write that in the comments. We are very happy to learn about this, because, for instance, for us, after using AWS for such a long time, some things seem super obvious, and I'm just wondering, is it the same for you as well? All right, cool. But let's wrap it up. It's a good time to actually sum it up. According to the official report that was created in 2020, and that more than 500 of US organizations were actually surveyed. And the topic of this report was to actually find out what is the impact of applying the CFM within the organization, especially in context of how mature is the organization when it comes to its AWS usage, so when it comes to its experience with AWS. And the yellowish or greenish color here is the positive impact. So as you can see, this impact grows the more experienced you are with the AWS. And it's the positive impact is visible not only on the cloud's expenditure and the general revenue and profitability organization, which is quite obvious, but also on the business risk. So it's about avoiding the unexpected occurrences related to the cost. But how to do this, how to get to these positive results? So you should start with the CFM ownership. So with building up the roles, the clear roles which are responsible for the cloud economics in your organization. So you need to build up this ownership, this awareness of accountability within the organization. Of course, you need an effective dialogue between the technical and financial parts of your organization. There need to be an understanding of what of the expectations of the both parts. It sounds like a very basic idea. It's just the communication, but sometimes the communication can be tricky, especially for us engineers. The next step is not only to acquire those costs, because it's very easy to acquire costs, but also to allocate them. Because if you allocate them properly, then subsequently you will be able to understand them. Once you have this, it's easier to get this visibility, to use the proper tools and the correct granularity of the data. Once you have this, you have the correct input, the necessary input for the optimizations. This actually sounds quite obvious, right? And then, of course, you can also think not only about now, but also about future. So forecasting and the monitoring, so verifying whether the actual reality meets the previous forecast. And the important point is what Jan has mentioned in the very beginning, that it's not a one-time event. This is not something, a short-term project that you do right now and forget about it. It's about like a continuous effort, and not just effort, but also some continuous investment in education, in keeping this awareness on a high level, in being aware of the new service, of the new mechanisms, of the new tools that are provided to you to actually simplify or your CFM or even make it better. AWS provides you plenty of tools and mechanisms to help with this. There are just few listed here. Hands-on workshops for those tools. Jan has showed you some trainers and certification. Of course, partners who have this capability, like Revolgy, particular assessments, or even peer events when you can meet other AWS practitioners just to exchange your experiences. If you want to get familiar with those mechanisms, here's the list of the links, so you can make the screenshot, or we will share this presentation after the webinar, so you will be also able to just go to this slide and use the link if you are interested in any particular mechanism I have mentioned. All right, that's everything we have prepared for you today. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jan. Thank you for the invitation. And do we actually have any questions that you would like us to answer?
Yes, we have. We can start with the first one. How difficult is to do a FinOps assessment and how long it will take? Sebastian, from your perspective, how is it? How you can just even, let's say, explore your current infrastructure and understand your maturity from of the FinOps?
It's very hard to tell because it really depends on the organization, how complex it is, and what is the overall level of proficiency at this particular point. So in my case, I typically work with startups. So we can make a very quick assessments even within an hour or two. So for instance, we have well-architected review, and one of the pillars of well-architected review is also the cost optimization. So this is something that we have some tools for, we have some forms for, and this is something we can do even within an hour. And of course, this hour does not provide you the ready-to-deploy solution. It's not possible, but at least it makes you aware of some issues that you have, and it's a good starting point for the, let's say, more focused conversation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I have one, let's say, secret tip, which might be like considered as a tipping point question, and this is: do you have like implemented a tagging strategy in your organization? Do you really, let's say, allocated all your cloud costs on the teams, on the, let's say, business parts of your company, etc.? And if the answer is okay, what's tagging? You probably get just the insight how mature the company is from this particular perspective, because if you don't understand your cloud cost, it's hard to optimize. We have a second question, and Vlad is asking that we mentioned a huge waste of resources at the beginning. uh, what might be, let's say, the average savings we can expect by implementing a FinOps?
I has the worst answer, and that you probably will hate, and it's the answer or the consultants give you all the time. So it depends. Uh, it depends on the kind of optimization that you applied. For instance, I knew some organizations that they have used. For instance, in their migration to the cloud, they have used a very simple approach, like lift and shift, and it was quite naive in their case. And in many cases, it meant they had a huge waste of the resources used. So, even for some organizations, for the particular, very specific kind of fluctuation in the workload, when they've actually applied the serverless paradigm, they were able to reduce their cloud costs even more than 10 times. And it was not because people who helped them were so brilliant. No, it was because the original solution was it was not terrible. It was just not adequate, I would say, or it was not well thought from the infrastructure perspective. It was created by developers without a deep collaboration with the infrastructure folks. Or, in other words, it was not cloud native. And when it was deployed to the cloud, there was a need for some more substantial refactoring to make it cost efficient.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a big fan of serverless, especially from the perspective of development, because it's the new level of abstraction, and maybe we can call it like a paradigm change, not only from the perspective of the technology but also the cost. But on the other hand, I have a friend of mine, and he all the time just says like, you go serverless, you pay for your laziness. But I don't agree. This is the way to go. So from my perspective, I see the customers who are running a huge Kubernetes clusters, and the major one, they are really taking care, let's say, to correlate their right sizing and spot instances distribution and everything like this around the actual usage, so to be able to pay for what they really use. But I also see a lot of companies where they don't simply care about even the right sizing in the Kubernetes clusters, and the huge one. And then you can have like the very, very big inefficiencies, as I just mentioned before at the beginning of the section. So you can, it depends, as you said, on the particular, let's say, team, particular company, but it is not so, let's say, I see it very frequently to see like the 50% not optimized spendings in the cloud, for example.
Yeah, I don't want to promise anything, but in general, it depends on how deeply do you want to get when it comes to optimizations. So, for instance, you can check your logging strategy, you can check your archiving strategy, you can check your all kinds of storage. You can try to introduce more fragmentation based on the usage patterns. You can check the consumption of your compute resources, and especially some scheduled provisioning and things like that. Of course, you can actually adjust your branching model and your deployment deployment model, your CI/CD, to better manage your environments, which can also save you a lot of time. Because one of the main applications of what Jan has said, so this tags and the allocation, is, for instance, to distinguish environments. And in many cases, it may appear that you are actually paying pretty much the same amount of time of money for the development environments and test environments than the production. And doesn't make sense in your case. Maybe it doesn't. Of course, it depends on the business, but the space for optimization is everywhere. But the problem is that there is a law of diminishing returns, and of course you have to be reasonable that you need to keep the amount of time you spend on optimizing reasonable, so you don't over optimize because the actual return may not be worth it. So I don't want to promise anything, because, for instance, I also know some organizations, as even from Czech Republic actually, I was really impressed. They had huge infrastructure, and we were not able to get more than 10% of the cost saving, even with quite a deep thorough analysis. So there is no single rule here.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It also smart to, let's say, build a business case for the potential optimizations you can have in the company, because the business case and the return of investment, it's all the time something you have to consider as well. But necessarily to be said that you have to go step by step, I would say. First, you need to understand, then you have to optimize, and then do it just your routine. Because if you start optimizing without, let's say, actual understanding of your cost structure, it's really hard. For example, like making a purchasing options, like for the reserved instances, etc., without actually knowing the actual spend patterns, it might be not a good approach, I would say. Sebastian, we have no other questions, but I have one personal to you. What do you think about the shift left principles in FinOps, or the cloud cost management?
I'm all about direct collaboration, autonomy, and effective scaling. So scaling without building huge, deep organizations. So the closer those people collaborate, and the more multi-dimensional and multi-skill teams we actually build, the better. So I think that, of course, it requires a big change in the way we think about our work, but it also helps to remove the silos. And this is very, very beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I also see that in some companies that they have really mastered the shift left principles of the FinOps to development, because, for example, they have like implemented in their CI/CD pipelines the cloud cost computation with each pull request. So they have like the instant feedback what the change they are bringing will be probably, and how it is forecasted in the actual cloud infrastructure running in AWS, for example.
And I love it, because the developers are not just coders. They are not. This is not servitude, They are also entrepreneurs. They understand the economics of the product they build. For instance, there is a very interesting fact that mentally we are constructed in this way that for us it's easier to build something new, even if in many cases it actually makes more sense to remove something. But we don't feel that we are rewarded for removing things that are not necessary, because we've made an effort to create them before.
Yeah.
So this is a good example. The more entrepreneurial are our people, the more they think about all the aspects related to the maintainability of the software, security of the software, economics of the software, the better, because this will make them able to create better products in the end. And this is the whole thing is about, right?
Absolutely. It was really nice end of our conversation and of our presentations. I'd like to, because we don't have any other questions, I'd like to thank you very much, Sebastian, for joining us for this webinar. It was so insightful, and I'm looking forward to just implement some of the principles we were talking about and some of the tools you presented in our customers' infrastructures. So let's do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the participation to everyone who was listening. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.